They said the nurse who took care of me was in an accident. I didn't think much of it at first. People get hurt, people heal. But this time, it wasn't just any nurse. It was Lydia, the woman who'd held my hand through strokes, sickness, and sorrow. The one who made me laugh when pain tried to take my breath. They said she was lucky to survive. I believed that until I learned what else survived with her. A secret, one that had been waiting in the dark for over 30 years. Funny thing about the past, it doesn't disappear. It just changes hospitals. Before we continue, tell me where you're watching from and subscribe for more stories from Grandma Evelyn. Because, child, the crash that almost took her life brought back the one that took my husband's. For almost 10 years, Lydia Jenkins was the first face I saw every morning. She wasn't family by blood, but kindness has its own kind of DNA. Every day she came into my room humming something, an old hymn, a jazz tune, sometimes nothing I could recognize, just enough to make the air feel lighter. "Morning, Miss Evelyn," she'd say, setting down my tray. "Coffee first, truth later." And I'd laugh because that's exactly how I liked it. When you get old, child, you stop needing grand things. You start measuring love in cups of coffee and how gently someone pulls the blanket over your legs. Lydia did those little things so well, you almost forgot she was human. And that's the trouble with angels walking among us. You stop wondering what wings they hide. The first time we met, I was still learning how to live with my stroke. Half my body stubborn, the other half scared of mirrors. Most nurses treated me like a task with a pulse. Lydia didn't. She sat beside me, brushed my hair, and said, "We'll get through this together." She told me stories while we worked through therapy about her church choir, her garden, the dog she once had named Mercy, and about how she liked driving at night with the windows down, letting the wind blow off the day. I remember smiling at that. "You sound like someone who's still running from something." She laughed, but her eyes didn't. "I guess we all are," she said. I didn't ask what she meant. The years rolled on, easy, quiet. When my son forgot to visit, Lydia brought me lemon pie. When my knees ached, she rubbed them with peppermint oil. When the nights got heavy, and they do when memory gets loud, she'd sit in the corner chair and hum till I fell asleep. She had a way of listening that made silence feel like part of the conversation. And sometimes when she thought I was asleep, I'd hear her whisper little prayers under her breath. Always the same few words. "Lord, forgive me for what I can't forget." I never asked what that meant. We all have our ghosts. I thought hers just stayed quieter than most. Charles, my late husband, used to say mercy comes in circles. He was the kind of man who fixed things, radios, hearts, you name it. He'd spend hours in the garage tinkering with machines that already worked. I think he believed if he just kept fixing things, the world might stay whole. Then one night, on his way back from helping a friend, a truck ran a red light. The officer said he died instantly. Instantly, as if time itself wanted to save me the details. That was 32 years ago. And still, every time I hear tires screech, something in me flinches. Lydia never pried about him, but she always remembered to ask if I wanted to talk. I told her enough to fill a few quiet evenings. She'd listen, nod, and say softly, "He sounds like someone the world was lucky to know." And for a long time, that was enough. When she got into her accident, it felt strange, like the universe had folded back on itself. The nurse who'd spent a lifetime keeping others alive now lay in a bed fighting for her own. The day I went to see her, the halls of that hospital felt too familiar. The same smell of disinfectant and secrets, the same beeping rhythm of borrowed time. I sat outside her room, looking at her through the glass. Her face was pale, peaceful, wrapped in tubes and quiet light. I remembered how she used to tell me, every nurse has two patients, the one in front of her and the one she used to be. I didn't understand that back then, but watching her now, I did. She wasn't just healing bodies all those years, she was trying to heal something else entirely. That night, as I left the hospital, the sunset bled across the parking lot like a wound that refused to close. And for some reason, I couldn't shake her old prayer from my head. Lord, forgive me for what I can't forget. At the time, I thought it was just a nurse's prayer, but it wasn't. It was a confession, and I had no idea that it belonged to both of us. The next morning, I went back to the hospital. The halls were still, too bright, too clean, the kind of clean that smells like fear pretending to be order. Lydia's room was at the end of the corridor, room 217. Strange how I remember numbers when I can't even remember what day it is sometimes. The nurse at the front desk smiled when she saw me. You her family? In every way that counts, I said. She nodded and let me in. Lydia looked small under the sheets. She'd always been sturdy, full of presence, a woman who filled a room without saying a word. Now, she seemed to have folded in on herself, like a prayer half finished. The machines beside her hummed softly, their lights blinking like patient stars. I sat down and took her hand. It was warm but limp, wrapped in gauze. "Hey, baby," I whispered. "It's me." Her eyelids fluttered, but she didn't wake. So I did what she used to do for me. I talked. "You always said hospitals feel like they're holding their breath," I said. "Well, I think you might be the reason why. Nobody's breathing until you do." The room didn't answer, just the beeping, that steady, steady rhythm of maybe. A few minutes later, a young doctor came in, tall, polite, face too tired for his age. "She's stable," he said quietly. "We think she'll wake soon. The concussion's minor, but the trauma's deep." "What happened?" I asked. He hesitated. "Car accident. A collision at an intersection outside of town. Single vehicle. No alcohol. Just bad luck." "Bad luck," I repeated. "That's what they called my husband's accident, too." He gave me the kind of smile doctors give when they don't know how to touch pain without making it worse. "If she wakes, keep her calm," he said, and left. I turned back to Lydia, studied the lines of her face. She had a small scar near her temple, old, faded, easy to miss unless you knew what to look for. I'd seen it before, but never thought to ask. Now it looked like punctuation at the end of a sentence I hadn't finished reading. Hours passed. Nurses came and went. The clock on the wall ticked like a heartbeat that had grown impatient. I must have drifted off, because when I opened my eyes again, the sun had shifted and the room had turned gold. That's when I heard it, a whisper, soft, trembling. "I didn't see him." I froze. Lydia's lips were moving. Her eyes were still closed, but her voice crawled through the air like smoke. "I didn't see him," she said again, her hand twitching in mine. "He stepped out too fast. I hit the brakes. I swear I hit the brakes." My stomach turned to stone. "Lydia?" I said carefully. She didn't hear me. "I called for help," she murmured. "They said it was instant. They said he didn't feel a thing." A tear slid down her cheek. "I prayed every day. I tried to find his family. I tried." The rest of the words broke apart, swallowed by a sob that came from somewhere far older than this hospital. I sat there, still as glass. The only sound was the machine. Beep, 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 steady, merciless. When she went quiet again, I realized my hand was trembling. There are moments when truth walks into a room without knocking, and once it sits down, you can't ask it to leave. I wanted to pretend I'd misheard, that she was talking about someone else, that fate wasn't cruel enough to tie my healer and my loss together with the same accident. But the universe doesn't waste irony. And deep down, so deep I could barely admit it, I knew. The next day, Naomi, the attending nurse, came in with fresh linens. She smiled, but her eyes darted nervously. She had a hard night, she said. Dreams, guilt maybe, happen sometimes with trauma patients. I forced my voice to sound casual. She said anything? Naomi hesitated. Just fragments about some accident years ago. Poor thing sounded terrified. Did she say who? No, ma'am, Naomi said gently. You know how memories mix up when folks are in pain. Yeah, I whispered. I know. That night, I went home and pulled out the old box under my bed, the one I hadn't opened since Charles's funeral. Inside was a small stack of newspaper clippings, yellowed with brine. Local man killed in collision. Driver never found. Never found. I used to think that phrase was mercy, that it meant I didn't have to face anyone, didn't have to see the eyes of the person who took everything from me. Now it felt like a curse. Because maybe the driver had been found. Maybe she'd been standing beside me all along, handing me medicine and wiping my tears, trying to undo a sin I never knew to forgive. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound felt sharp, the ticking of the clock, the whisper of wind against the shutters, my own heartbeat. I sat in the dark until morning came, holding Charles's silver bracelet in my palm. I'd worn it every day for 30 years, but that night it felt heavier. When the sun finally broke through the blinds, I said it out loud for the first time. Lord, is this what forgiveness costs? The air didn't answer. But somewhere deep inside, I knew the rest of the story was already waiting. And soon, maybe too soon, Lydia would wake up, and I'd have to decide what kind of woman I really was. Lydia woke 2 mornings later. Naomi called me before sunrise, her voice small and cautious. "She's asking for you," she said. And just like that, every prayer I'd been pretending not to say got its answer. The kind you don't know if you should thank God for or fear. I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot for a long time before going in. The steering wheel was cool under my palms, but my hands were sweating. I whispered, "Lord, help me hold my tongue until I know what to do with it." Room 217 looked different in daylight, the kind of sterile bright that tries to pass for hope. Lydia was sitting up, pale but awake. Her eyes lit up when she saw me. "Miss Evelyn," she said weakly, "you came." I did. I tried to smile. It felt brittle. "How you feeling, baby?" "Like I got run over by life twice," she said, smiling faintly. We both laughed, the wrong kind of laugh, the kind that fills silence instead of fixing it. She told me about the accident, what she remembered anyway. "I was coming from choir practice," she said. "Rain started out of nowhere. Headlights came from the side, fast. I don't remember anything after the sound." Her hands shook when she reached for the cup of water. "Naomi said they pulled me out through the passenger side. Guess it wasn't my time." "No," I said softly, "it wasn't." We sat there for a while, 2 women balancing truth like a sharp thing between us. Then she said something that made my throat close. "Sometimes," she whispered, "I think accidents find me. Maybe because I never paid for the first one." I didn't breathe. "What first one?" I asked. She froze. I saw the moment she realized what she'd said. Her eyes darted to mine, wide and wet. Miss Evelyn. Say it, I whispered, please. She looked down, her fingers twisting the blanket. It was years ago. I was 21, just got my license. My mama used to say I drove like I was trying to catch the horizon. I was coming back from work, tired, raining hard. I didn't see him cross the street until it was too late. Her voice cracked. He stepped out in front of me. I hit the brakes. I swear I did. The car spun, and when it stopped, she covered her face with her hands. I ran to him, tried CPR, but he wasn't breathing. People came out yelling. Someone said they called the police. I panicked, got back in the car, drove home. The beeping monitor was the only sound in the room. She kept talking, words spilling like confession through clenched fingers. The next morning, I went to turn myself in, but my mama stopped me. She said, "You'll ruin your life, baby. You'll never be a nurse, never help nobody." She said to pray instead, so I did. For 30 years, I prayed every night. She lowered her hands and looked at me. I didn't know his name then. I didn't know. She stopped. Her face changed, her eyes filled with understanding, then horror. "Oh God," she whispered. "It was him, wasn't it? The man who—" Her voice broke. "Your husband." I didn't cry, didn't shout, didn't do anything a woman should when she learns her entire healing came from the hands that caused her pain. I just sat there, every muscle in me turning to stone, because if I moved, I was afraid of what might come out. "Yes," I said finally, my voice steady but empty. "His name was Charles." She closed her eyes and sobbed, quiet, body-breaking sobs that made the monitor skip a beat. "I didn't know," she kept saying. "I didn't know. I didn't know." "I believe you," I said, because I did. And that was the hardest part. I stood, walked to the window, and watched the light crawl across the blinds. "You've been taking care of me for years," I said softly. "I tried to make it right," she whispered. "Every patient, every shift, I told myself if I could just save enough people, maybe God would balance the books." "Does he?" I asked, still staring outside. "I don't know," she said, "but I had to try. I thought maybe if I helped you long enough, he'd forgive me through you." Her honesty hurt more than the lie would have. When I turned back, she was watching me with eyes so full of regret they looked older than her face. "I'll understand if you never want to see me again," she said. "I killed your husband. You trusted me with your life, and I didn't deserve it." I walked back to the chair, sat down, and folded my hands in my lap. My wedding ring, thin gold, worn smooth with years, caught the light. "I've had 3 decades to learn what grief does to a person," I said quietly. "It turns anger into furniture. You get used to it being there, sitting heavy in the corner. You dust it, walk around it, make peace with it, but it never leaves." She nodded, crying silently. "But I also learned something else," I said. "Hate doesn't fix the floorboards. It just burns the house." For a long time, neither of us spoke. The machines hummed. Outside, a nurse's laughter floated down the hall, too soft to interrupt what was happening in that room, too human to ignore. When I finally stood to leave, Lydia reached for my hand. "I'm sorry," she whispered again. "I know," I said, and I did, because her voice sounded exactly like mine the day I buried Charles, tired, broken, wishing God would swap places with time. I left the hospital and sat in my car again, hands gripping the steering wheel the same way they had 30 years ago when I got that call from the police. Back then, I'd prayed for the driver to live just long enough to understand what they'd done. Now, I wasn't so sure that prayer hadn't been answered too literally. The sunset outside was the same shade of orange I remembered from that night, the kind of sky that burns just to prove it still can. And in that color, I saw both of them, the man I lost and the woman I couldn't bring myself to hate. When I got home, I poured 2 cups of coffee out of habit, one for me, one for the man who wasn't there. I set his cup by the window where the light hit it soft. Then I whispered, "Charles, she didn't run from mercy. She ran into it. Now what do I do with that?" The wind outside rustled the curtains, light catching on the silver bracelet around my wrist. And somehow, I knew the next part of this story wasn't about pain anymore. It was about what to do with what was left. When the house falls quiet the way it does after 10 at night, memories have a way of unzipping themselves, one small sound at a time. The clock on the mantel ticked like an old man's fist, slow and steady. I sat at the kitchen table with Charles's silver bracelet in my palm, turning it over like it might answer me if I rubbed it the right way. I pulled out the dusty box from under the bed, the one with the yellowed clippings and the funeral program, and from the bottom, Charles's old notebook slid into my lap as if it had been waiting. He used to keep that notebook on the workbench full of screwdriver marks and coffee stains. He had a habit of writing small nothings in it, grocery lists, a joke, a thought that struck him as worth saving. Once, he'd written in the margin, "Fixing is a prayer." I'd smiled then and thought it quaint. Tonight, those tiny nothings felt like a map. I opened to a page where his handwriting leaned with age. "If life ever asks you to choose between justice and mercy, choose mercy. Justice will catch up." The words struck me different at night than they ever had in daylight. Maybe because in daylight you can pretend things are rational. At night, the yard is just a hole, and the heart is a lantern you carry yourself. I read the entry again and again, listening to the house breathe. Lydia's face flickered across my mind like a slide projector. Hands that steadied my shaking cup, the quiet murmur at dawn when my fears were loudest, the way she hummed off-key hymns while tucking my blanket. And then there was the other slide, the image of the road that took Charles, the squeal of tires that never quite leaves you, the way a small thing, an instant, can make the rest of your life rearrange itself. Grief has a grammar all its own. It conjugates verbs into regrets and makes futures into questions. For years, I'd spoken to Charles out loud as if he were in the other room polishing the radio. I'd ask him how his day was and tell him the weather, and in that small ritual, I kept him nearby. Losing him left a silence that could fit a small family inside. When Lydia's confession found me, soft and raw in that hospital room, it didn't land like an accusation. It landed like an echo, the sound of someone else's life meeting mine. The part of me trained by hurt wanted to turn that echo into thunder. Anger is easier sometimes, neat, sharp, decisive. It gives you an enemy to point at so you don't have to look at the pile of loose threads that grief has left in you. But then I thought of Charles's handwriting, mercy. He'd scribbled that like it was something manageable, like a thing you could pick up and carry. He'd been the kind of man who spent his life fixing radios, fences, relationships. He believed in the slow, ordinary work of repair. I'd learned from him that forgiveness is not forgetting. Forgiveness is deciding what you will do with what you remember. I poured a cup of coffee out of habit. The steam curled up and disappeared. I set the cup down and rubbed the bracelet on my wrist until it warmed to the touch. The kitchen smelled of lemon polish and the ghost of last Sunday's pie. I'd imagined myself shouting or slamming doors when I heard the truth. Instead, my hands shook as if the motion of shaking could stir a different answer out of my chest. I thought of Lydia as a young woman once, Her face in the police reports, the way the mother had whispered that she would ruin her life if she told the truth. I thought of how fear can smother courage, how a single terrified decision can become a life sentence of apology. She had carried a confession like a stone in her shoe for 30 years. Imagine walking like that for decades, every step a tiny punishment. That thought of punishment as a chosen burden caught at something tender in me. All these years I'd worn the absence of Charles like armor, allowing no one inside where the wound lived. But Lydia's sorrow looked startlingly like my own. She had tried to fix what she had broken by becoming a nurse, by spending herself on other bodies. I felt a strange and inconvenient recognition. People repair in the ways they were taught to. I found myself flipping through Charles's notebook for the rest of the night. There was a small passage dated a summer before his death. If you get a chance to apology or to mend, do both. The world needs fewer monuments and more quilts. He always said quilts, making things that hold warmth rather than stone. He would have rolled his eyes at the poetic way I was reading his scribbles now, but I could almost hear him. Evie, love fixes the loose threads. By dawn, I'd stitched together my own small pattern of thought. Justice, true, courtly justice, might have its time. People who need accounting will get it in ways I don't pretend to foresee. But mercy is immediate. It is what you hand someone when you decide not to be their executioner. It is practical, like a patch on a torn sleeve. It is the work of waking up and choosing to give life instead of adding to death. I wrapped Charles's bracelet around my wrist and stood, the wood floor creaking under my feet like an old backbone remembering to move. The sun came through the kitchen window, and the dust caught in it like a small congregation. I put the coffee on the counter, not to drink, but to steady myself. Then I sat at the little piano in the corner, the one with the chipped key that Charles used to play on Sundays, and tapped a note. The sound was small, but it was something. Somewhere in the house, Pastor Riley's clock struck 7. I could have called him. I could have sharpened my grief into righteous action, marched to the hospital with the cold logic of accusation, and demanded a name to hate. Instead, I made a choice that felt stranger and harder, to hold my hand open. That doesn't mean I forgave in a breath. Forgiveness, like a muscle, needed exercising. I would test it and fail and test it again. But I'd stopped waiting for the world to tell me what was right. I decided, slowly, with the stubbornness Charles loved, that I would do mercy first and see if justice, in its own time, might do its work without my help. I wrote nothing that morning. I simply wound the music box Leon had given me and let the simple melody run out. It was small and fragile, but like a stitch across a wound, it made the edges meet. I knew I'd have to speak to Lydia again. I knew I'd have to speak to the people who'd walk past her without seeing her. But for the first time since the phone rang 32 years ago, the thought of those conversations didn't tighten my chest into a fist. I stood and held the pages of Charles's notebook to my heart. Mercy, I thought, is a decision. It is the work of choosing to love the life still in front of you rather than living forever in the one behind you. And tonight, I decided to live. Pastor Riley showed up 2 days later. He always did that, appeared right after I'd made some kind of uneasy truce with myself, like the Lord sent him to double-check my homework. He came in without knocking, holding a paper bag that smelled like fried catfish. "Brought lunch," he said. "Thought you might forget to eat." "I didn't forget," I said, pulling 2 plates from the cabinet. "Just wasn't hungry." "That's the same thing, Evelyn." He sat at the table, watching me pour iced tea. "How's Lydia?" "Alive," I said. He nodded. "And how are you?" "Still deciding." He chuckled softly. "That's honest. Most people skip straight to pretending." We ate in silence for a few minutes. The catfish was still hot, flaky, perfectly seasoned. He waited until I'd taken the last bite before he said it. I heard about the accident and the truth that came with it. I looked at him. Word travels faster than sin in this town. Truth always does. Folks just listen slower. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. What are you thinking of doing? I don't know, I admitted. Every time I close my eyes, I see Charles, and then I see her, and I can't decide if I'm supposed to hold her hand or point my finger. He nodded, patient as rain. You're not the first to ask that question. Most people never stop asking. Then what's the answer? He smiled. Sometimes there isn't one. Sometimes you just choose what you can live with. I sighed, rubbing my temples. Pastor, you ever forgive someone who didn't deserve it? He smiled again, but it was the tired kind. Every Sunday. I raised an eyebrow. Preachers aren't holy, Evelyn. We're just the first to admit we need grace before we tell everyone else to look for it. He paused, thoughtful. You know, there's a passage in Romans I keep thinking about. It says, while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Grace doesn't wait for an apology. It just shows up. I stared at him. You're telling me to forgive her? I'm telling you grace ain't about her. It's about you. He took a slow sip of tea. I've known you a long time. You don't hate easy. You hurt quiet. And that's dangerous because quiet pain starts to believe it's peace. I looked down at my hands. She took the man I loved. No, he said gently. The accident took him. She's been living with the same ghost you have, just from the other side of the story. He reached across the table, his rough hand covering mine. The devil likes to sell grief wholesale, Evelyn. He wants 2 souls for every one death. You can break that deal. That line hit deep. He stood, collected the dishes, rinsed them out like he owned the place. When you go to see her again, don't take your anger with you. Take your husband. I frowned. What you mean? Take his words, he said. He wrote mercy for a reason. After he left, I sat at the table a long time. The air felt thicker somehow, full of everything I hadn't said. I opened Charles's notebook again and ran my fingers over that one sentence. If life ever asks you to choose between justice and mercy, choose mercy. Justice will catch up. I whispered it out loud, testing how it sounded in my mouth. Mercy. It felt foreign, too light for what I carried. But maybe that's what forgiveness is supposed to feel like. A thing you can't believe will hold the weight until it does. The next morning, I drove to the hospital. The drive was quiet, the kind of quiet that sounds like a question you haven't answered yet. Sunlight cut through the windshield, warm and clean. For the first time in a long while, the road didn't look like the scene of a crime. It looked like a path home. When I got to room 217, Lydia was sitting up, staring out the window. She looked better, color back in her cheeks, hair brushed, eyes tired but open. "Hey, baby," I said. She turned, startled, then smiled faintly. "You came back." "I did." "I didn't think you would." "Neither did I." I sat down beside her bed. The silence between us felt like a fragile bridge, but it held. She fiddled with her IV line, nervous. "I don't expect anything, Miss Evelyn. I don't want forgiveness I don't deserve." "Good," I said, "because forgiveness isn't about deserving. It's about surviving." She looked at me, confused. "You think you've been living all these years trying to pay a debt," I said softly, "but you've just been keeping it alive, and so have I." Her eyes filled with tears. "How do you stop owing?" "You don't," I said. "You just stop collecting." She let out a shaky laugh that turned into a sob. I don't know if I can. You can, I said, because you already did. I reached into my bag and pulled out Charles's notebook. The cover was cracked, edges frayed. I flipped it open to the page I'd been reading for days. He wrote something once, I said, about mercy. Want to hear it? She nodded. I read it out loud. If life ever asks you to choose between justice and mercy, choose mercy. Justice will catch up. When I finished, Lydia was crying silently, her hand pressed against her mouth. He was talking about me, she whispered. No, I said. He was talking about both of us. We sat there until the light began to fade, the sunset painting the walls gold. The monitors beeped slow and steady, like a metronome counting out time we didn't deserve but were given anyway. I stood to leave. I'll come by again tomorrow. Why? She asked, her voice trembling. Because mercy doesn't happen in one visit. She laughed through her tears. You sound like a preacher. I smiled. Pastor Riley says the same thing about me. That night, I drove home with the windows down. The air smelled like cut grass and rain. Somewhere behind me, the hospital lights glowed against the dark. For the first time in decades, the road didn't feel haunted. It felt honest. When I reached the driveway, I sat in the car and looked at the house. In the window, the reflection of the porch light flickered on the silver bracelet around my wrist. Justice, I whispered, touching the bracelet. You can rest now. Mercy's on duty. And for the first time since that night so long ago, the silence inside my chest felt less like absence and more like peace waiting to start again. When I walked into the hospital that morning, the world seemed softer somehow. Not lighter, grief doesn't vanish like fog, but softer, like it finally learned how to stop shouting. The hall smelled of disinfectant and coffee, nurses trading jokes under their breath, the sound of life stubbornly continuing. I passed the chapel on the way to Lydia's room. Someone inside was playing the piano, slow, gentle chords that hung in the air like forgiveness itself. When I reached room 217, the door was open. Lydia was sitting by the window, sunlight spilling across her face. Her hands were folded in her lap, fingers tracing the hospital bracelet the way I used to trace Charles's name on our wedding ring. She looked up when I stepped in. Her eyes widened, hope and guilt living side by side. Miss Evelyn, she said softly, I didn't think you'd come back. I smiled faintly. Then it's a good thing I don't always think before I act. I sat down beside her bed. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of machines, a rhythm, a pulse, like time deciding to give us both another chance. I've been doing a lot of thinking, I began, about roads, about mercy, about how life's too long to stay angry and too short to stay quiet. She swallowed hard. I keep replaying that night. Every time I close my eyes, I see his face. I see the headlights. I see everything I destroyed. Destroyed? I asked. Child, you didn't destroy me. You just broke something that was already fragile. The way this world breaks all the good things too soon. She started to cry, shaking her head. I can't forgive myself, Miss Evelyn. I can't even pray right anymore. I've tried to atone every way I know, but the guilt doesn't leave. I reached over, took her hand. Her skin was warm, trembling. That's because guilt doesn't leave, I said. You have to walk past it. She looked up, eyes wet. How? By knowing you've done enough, I said. By realizing the debt was never yours to carry this long. She started to speak, but I pressed her hand gently. Listen, I said. You've been caring for me for years. feeding me, cleaning me, talking me back into wanting another day. Every kindness you gave me, you gave him too. You see, child, I took a deep breath. You didn't take him from me. You just sent him home first. The words hung there, soft but heavy, the kind that don't echo because they land where they belong. Lydia's hand tightened around mine, and the sob that came out of her chest sounded like release, the kind of crying people do when the punishment they've carried finally puts itself down. She leaned forward, tears soaking my sleeve. "I don't deserve this," she whispered. "None of us do," I said. "That's why it's called grace." We sat that way for a long time, two women bound together by a mistake, now free because one of them decided not to make another. When she finally pulled back, her face was wet, but her eyes were bright. "What do I do now?" she asked. "Live," I said, "not out of guilt, out of gratitude." A nurse knocked on the door, peeked in, then smiled at the sight of us. "Everything all right in here?" "Better than all right," I said. "We're finishing an old story." When she left, Lydia turned back to me. "You know," she said, voice trembling, "when I hit him, I thought my life was over. But you let me live twice." I squeezed her hand. He'd want that. Charles always said mercy was just love on the other side of justice. She smiled weakly. "He sounds like the kind of man who'd forgive me too." I looked toward the window. The sunlight had moved across the floor, warm and golden, spilling over both of us. "He already did," I said. We talked until the afternoon light turned soft. She told me about her mother, how guilt had eaten her alive until the day she died. I told her about Charles, how he loved lemon pie and Sunday drives, how he used to hum off-key when he was fixing radios. We shared stories until the past stopped feeling like a wound and started feeling like a garden. Different roots, same soil. When it was time to leave, she tried to thank me. I stopped her. "Don't," I said. "Just live good enough to make his mercy worth it." She nodded. "I will." As I stood to go, she reached out. "Miss Evelyn?" "Yes, baby." "If I ever forget how to forgive myself," she hesitated, "will you remind me again?" I smiled. "That's what friends are for." Outside, the evening had cooled. The parking lot shimmered with fading light, and I could almost hear Charles's voice in the wind, the calm one he used when life didn't make sense. "You did good, Evie." Maybe it was my imagination. Maybe it was mercy checking in. Either way, I whispered back, "We did." And for the first time in 30 years, I walked to my car without feeling like I was leaving anyone behind. The days that followed were quiet, not the heavy kind of quiet that used to live in my house, but the peaceful sort, the kind that sounds like an exhale after years of holding your breath. The morning light through the kitchen window felt different, warmer somehow. Maybe it wasn't the light that changed, but the woman standing in it. I made coffee, poured 2 cups out of habit, and set one by the window. That ritual used to hurt. Now it felt like a conversation that didn't need words. I didn't speak to Charles out loud anymore. I didn't have to. He was part of the air again, everywhere and nowhere, in the same way forgiveness hides inside grief. Lydia came by a few weeks later, walking slow but steady. She looked healthy, a little nervous, carrying a small paper bag. "I brought lemon pie," she said. I laughed. "You trying to make me cry before lunch?" She smiled shyly. "Thought it might bring him back for a bit." "It does," I said, taking the bag. "And you too." We ate together, the kind of meal that doesn't need conversation to be holy. Afterward, she stood up and hugged me. Not like a patient or a nurse, but like two women who had walked through fire and found each other standing on the other side. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me," I said softly. "We both got free." Later that night, I sat outside on the porch. The stars were thin and kind. The air smelled like rain that hadn't made up its mind yet. Somewhere down the street, a church bell rang once. Just one note, but it carried. I thought about all the versions of myself that had come before. The young wife who loved too hard. The widow who forgot how to laugh. The old woman who believed peace was something you had to earn. But this version, the one sitting here now, she finally understood something simple. Forgiveness isn't an act, it's a rhythm. You have to practice it every day, the way you practice breathing. Steady, imperfect, necessary. I opened Charles's old notebook again, the pages soft as cloth now. Right there between grocery lists and half-finished sentences, I found a line I'd missed before. Mercy doesn't fix the past, it keeps the past from fixing you. I smiled. He'd written that years before Lydia ever entered my life. Maybe he knew I'd need it later. Maybe God did. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves like a soft applause. I looked up at the stars and whispered, "Charles, she's forgiven. So am I." Somewhere, I swear I heard that low chuckle he used to give when I said something sentimental. And I laughed too, because even after everything, love still had the last word. The next morning, I wrote in my own notebook, the one I keep now. We spend our lives learning how to survive loss, but if we're lucky, we learn how to survive love too, the kind that forgives even when it remembers. I closed the book, set it by the window next to Charles's old one. 2 stories, 1 ending. Then I poured myself another cup of coffee, looked out at the world that kept on spinning, and said what I always tell anyone who asks how I made it through. Guilt builds prisons. Mercy builds homes. Before the credits of life roll, that's all I want people to know, child. That forgiveness doesn't erase what happened, it just redeems who you become after. Because every scar I have, every memory that once hurt to touch, now just points to the same truth. You don't forgive to forget, you forgive to remember differently.